So I recently submitted my PhD thesis, and I find myself thinking quite a bit about my experience as first a master's student and then as a PhD student. So here are 5 lessons I have from my time as a graduate student. So lesson number 1, your supervisor really dictates the type of atmosphere you'll be interfacing with. With a master's and a PhD, you may be committing to 6 or sometimes more years to working with your supervisor. So if you're an undergraduate student and you're watching this, take your interview seriously when you meet a potential supervisor. They're interviewing you, you are interviewing them. I've seen very passionate and talented students burn out from various forms of bad supervision. There's plenty of attributes a supervisor can have that may or may not work well with you, and there are plenty of attributes that will work well with you. So make sure the atmosphere you will be entering is something you feel like you could put up with or you will thrive in for the next 2 to 6 years. In my case, I got really lucky. I interviewed with my current supervisor. He seemed really nice, but then the university sent me to chat with his students over lunch, and they sold me on him as a supervisor. The atmosphere that was created for me in this research group is definitely a vital ingredient in the success that I've seen as a graduate student. And of course, it was instrumental in me keeping up with my passion in physics and continuing on to a postdoc. Lesson number 2, taking time off is efficient. When you exit undergrad, you are used to working whenever, wherever, work never ends, and there is always a deadline around the corner. Odds are most people entering graduate school probably are pretty burnt out. It's really tempting to treat your graduate school this way as well. I had to take courses, for example, in my first 3 years of my master's and then PhD, so at times I did have to work that hard. But once it's just you and the research, there is no deadline, there is always going to be more work. Every problem you solve now will likely lead to a brand new, potentially more difficult problem. There is no end to research. So it's important to prioritize yourself, your friends, and your family. Research isn't life, but oddly enough, when you're out on a walk, while you're cooking, or something along those lines, you'll end up solving a problem you were stuck on. Sometimes, at least for me, walking away is the best thing to do. There is no magical formula for when to do this or how to prioritize in what proportions. It's more of an introspection thing and figuring out what works for you personally. For me, I definitely did not do this initially. I always needed that next plot, some new line of code, or some derivation. I was also tempted to add extra reading and trying to learn every new thing I came across that I didn't understand. Eventually, luckily for me, a more senior graduate student gave me a good chat about work-life balance. So there's plenty of time to do your work, there's plenty of time to do new things, but 6 years is a long time to be 100% devoting your whole life just to research. So make time for yourself, try not to burn yourself out. There's plenty of time for all of the things you want to do. Lesson number 3. There is a time to go slow and a time to go fast in research. Sometimes the fastest and easiest solution is the best solution. You don't need to write your code from scratch if there is a library that exists, for example. And you don't need to derive something independently if there is a thorough step-by-step derivation somewhere you can work off of. Sometimes moving forward in a project isn't hurt by taking the easiest path. But, of course, sometimes it is. Sometimes for a problem to be fully explored and to be answered, you need to push yourself to learn new things thoroughly. But remember, you don't need to start by defining the real numbers rigorously to do a physics problem. An important thing to do, however, is to keep track of the corners you do cut to get to the answer. I wrote a lazy exact diagonalization scheme to get quick results for a project. It ended up being all we needed as evidence, as small system sizes already showed the behavior we thought we would see. So this lazy approach was sufficient. Once this project was finished, however, I started writing a much more sophisticated code so that I could do much bigger system sizes. New projects that needed code were fed initial results from the more lazy code or the easiest path code, but eventually were given results from my larger code that took quite a bit of time to write completely. This is, of course, a hard line to walk, and you should keep track of it and see what works for you. By the end of your PhD, you will be expected to have a good grasp of the literature in your field, and you should have a solid amount of skills you've learned along the way. Lesson number 4. At some point in your research life, you are going to get to the point where you have too many ideas to chase after on your own, or you have built a skill set that isn't quite suited to a project you are currently working on. At some point on, the earlier the better in my opinion, you should start forming connections with other people and other scientists. People in your group, people in adjacent groups or nearby universities, and so on. This might not be possible for everyone, but if you can, having collaborators or connections with people you can just talk to about projects can make your life a lot easier and allow you to solve more challenging problems. You will also get exposed to a number of different approaches to problems that will be very valuable. I was lucky enough to be an hour's drive from the Perimeter Institute, so I visited often and met a longtime collaborator there. I hear some students complain that every time they write an article, they write the whole thing. Well, when you have collaborators who are actively contributing to the problems in the project, they often write those sections. So not only do you get to solve harder problems, you, in some cases, don't even do as much work. So don't forget, building a community of collaborators and connections and networking is a part of research. Science is a collaborative endeavor. Last but not least, you will eventually leave graduate school. I had this on my mind from the beginning until the end, of course, but how it affected my decisions changed depending on how my end goals changed. You may want to go into academia, pursue postdocs, or you may want to go into industry. Regardless of what you choose, it's important to plan to get skills during your graduate school career that will aid your end goal. For me, I always wanted to do postdocs, but as a backup plan, I knew I was a good coder. Coupling this with my undergraduate degree in applied mathematics, I knew I could become a strong computational physicist, so I prioritized this skill over analytical tools initially. By the end of my PhD, I would claim I'm a pretty strong numerical scientist, and I've also added a few tricks for analytical work. But the moral of the story is keep an eye on how you are growing as a researcher and as an individual. From hard skills you want to have after you graduate to soft skills that will improve your ability to navigate new environments. All of these things are important, and improving them in the direction you want them to go is important. So I've known graduate students who have taken extra classes to learn how to be a better teacher. I've seen people who work purely in analytical studies start picking up coding related problems, and so on. So that's it for this video. I hope my reflections or tips or whatever you want to call this rant were helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.